Entering the Mayo experience.
Mayo experience. Mayo experience. Mayo experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by DraftKings. Today, we're talking the 2022 NFL draft class for everyone out there like myself who doesn't really pay much attention to college football and really has no idea who any of these guys are. We need a primer before we start getting into mock drafts, draft props, and later on in the week, Jeff Ratcliffe from FTN Fantasy will be joining me to break down specific team needs and go over some of the NFL free agent signings that we haven't talked about as of yet. But today, we go to the guru, the czar on all of this, Emory Hunt from CBS Sportsline and CBS Sports HQ. He is the owner of Football Game Plan, and he does the most comprehensive guide every single year to all the prospects that you need to know. Emory, what's going on, man? Thanks for being on.
I appreciate you, Pat, man. It's always a pleasure to jump on the show.
Yeah, so let's get into it. Who are the guys that I need to know? Because I'm seeing these mock drafts, and all of a sudden the Jags aren't taking it. They signed a bunch of offensive linemen. I figured that's where they would go. They signed a receiver in the offseason. So are they going defensive line? Because that seems to be the case right now. And someone named Walker, Trayvon Walker, is he really the number one pick?
I don't believe he's the number one overall pick. You know, in my opinion, I feel like that still should be Kayvon Thibodeaux, who has been consistent all throughout his career, has the athletic traits that you look for, can do a lot of different things. He was a presumptive number one coming out of last year and coming into this season. I just feel like it's a situation of prospect fatigue, and that's why you saw Aiden Hutchinson's name up there at number one. That's why you saw many different offensive tackles, and now you're seeing Trayvon Walker. So the Jags truly could go anywhere with their pick. But if it were me, I still feel as though Kayvon Thibodeaux paired up with Josh Allen would be the best bet for Jacksonville at number one.
So depending on where you look at in terms of ranking, so you would have Thibodeaux at number one of the edge rushers and pass rushers, although sometimes I'm seeing him as low as like going fourth overall, dropping somehow to the Jets.
Yeah, he's still number one for me. I only gave out 2 90 grades this year in my draft guide, and one was to Kayvon Thibodeaux. The other was to Zion Johnson, the guard out of Boston College. And Thibodeaux, to me, again, he checks all these boxes that you want: height, weight, speed, athleticism, versatility, all of those things, and production too. So, I mean, he's been productive when he got there as a freshman, as a true freshman. And I feel like people just, wanted to talk about other prospects and is not knocking Trayvon Walker, who's good in his own right, and also Aiden Hutchinson or any one of these tackles. It's just the fact that if you're going to go number one, you want a slam dunk pick. And I feel like Thibodeaux is just that.
What do you see this draft shaping up to be? I'm trying to think back in time. Like, what year was the Eric Fisher draft? Was that 2014, 2018? Now I can't even remember at this point, but it seems like there are so few skill position guys going inside, at least projected to go inside the top 5, the top 10 versus regular years. Is this just a very line-heavy draft in general? That's where all the talent is? Or is this because of the teams that are picking at the top of the draft?
I think it's the teams that are picking at the top, but also we're looking at the deepest draft since about World War II, when folks went away for the war and college football had to take that pause for about 2 years. And so when these guys came back, they were stacked rosters. And we look at what we went through the last couple of seasons with COVID-19. You had these super seniors that are now returning. That last year's draft guide that I put out, I had about just a little bit over 500 prospects. Well, this year I have over 1,000 individual prospects because, again, you're taking advantage of the regular seniors, the super seniors, and those guys that took advantage of that extra year that the NCAA granted. So we're looking at essentially 2 draft classes in one with this 2022 group.
Well, does that make it seem strange then that none of these quarterback prospects are getting talked up as, hey, this guy needs to go? Because Carolina is the most logical option at number 6 to take a quarterback, but everyone, at least from what I gather, obviously I don't know, but it does seem like, hey, if they take a quarterback at 6, like that's a reach at this point based on this quarterback quality, and next year would be the year that you would want to tackle a quarterback? Or is it just all these other prospects are just so good that it's pushed the quarterbacks down?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, but people always love next year's draft class. Every year is next year is the best. But I feel like if you're Carolina, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. Do you have the staff in place and the luxury in place of developing a guy? And keep in mind, this is the same staff that said Sam Darnold was better than Teddy Bridgewater. We saw that wasn't true. And also, this is the same coaching staff that threw Sam Darnold under the bus and threw Cam Newton under the bus. So do we really trust him to develop a young quarterback that needs grooming? Or do you feel more comfortable with Carolina going after maybe a Baker Mayfield or any one of these quarterbacks that's still out there, maybe making a play for Jimmy Garoppolo, or taking someone that has a high floor that can step in right now and play right away? And that guy to me is Desmond Ridder. So there's many different ways that they can go about this sixth overall pick or their quarterback situation. But I think it's more about who is making, the pick and who is developing the talent, who's responsible for the growth of the talent. I think that's the bigger question here than who to take at number 6.
Yeah, just looking back, it was the 2013 NFL draft where we had offensive tackle, defensive end, defensive end guard go for the first 7 picks before Tavon Austin was selected by the then St. Louis Rams, and then E.J. Manuel was the first quarterback off the board. Does it remind you of how this year is going to shake out?
It depends. There's a couple teams, maybe there's 2 teams 3 that I would say could definitely be in play to take a quarterback. The obvious one is Detroit. Everyone's talking about that. The other obvious one is probably Pittsburgh. People are looking at them as taking one, but the one that no one has brought up that is sitting right there, number 3, with a chance to take a guy like a Malik Willis, are the Houston Texans. Right now, Malik Willis is better than Davis Mills. Desmond Ridder is better than Davis Mills. Houston could be in play to take a quarterback if one presents itself for them. They have 2 picks in the top 15. So they could easily take a position player at number 3 and also a quarterback at 13 if one of those 2 guys are there, or vice versa. Because to be completely honest, Davis Mills looked competent, but his yards per attempt was way down. The people are looking at the touchdown to interception ratio, but let's be honest, you have a chance to get a difference maker in a Malik Willis filling that spot, that void that was left by Deshaun Watson. So I wouldn't count out Houston being in play for a quarterback too.
So how do you rate the quarterbacks this year? Because you mentioned Willis, you mentioned Ridder. If Twitter has taught me anything, is that Willis is awesome and might be the best quarterback of all time. That's how people are talking about him right now. He went from being someone that it seemed like people were very indifferent to. They started watching a few combine clips, and now the armchair scout is just like, Malik Willis, let's go. He's basically Josh Allen, but better. Like, how do you rate these guys out?
Well, Willis is my number 1. He would be the only quarterback that I would feel comfortable taking in round 1. Then you have Desmond Ridder. Then you have, everyone else. But there's a couple of guys that have some upside. I'm a big fan of Skylar Thompson, who is, my number 3 quarterback out of Kansas State. Injury concerns is an issue with him, but he plays a lot like Derek Carr. My number 2 quarterback is Caleb Ellaby out of Western Michigan. This is someone who I expected to think when you see guys on Twitter talking about prospects, you automatically assume they're probably not that good because everybody on Twitter is talking about it. And when you watch, I was like, oh, this dude really got skills. He can play, he can throw it, he can run. He played his best game against Pitt. He outplayed Kenny Pickett. He played a really good game against Michigan. So in those bigger games against Power 5 competition, he stepped up and played really well. He's another one of these guys that's very underrated. And I kind of lump Matt Corral, Sam Howell, and Carson Strong, the 3 other quote-unquote big-name quarterbacks in the mix. They're in the same boat. I all gave them 74 grades. So they're kind of guys that I view as more, QB2s or bus driver type number 1s, but no one that I would take in round 1. Ridder would be the only one who's my number 3 quarterback, or 4 quarterback, with the same grade as Skylar Thompson that I would feel comfortable taking later. So if you want to play both ends, if you're Detroit and you don't want to take Malik Willis at number 2, and you want to try to find a way to move from 32 up into the teens to go for a Desmond Ridder, I can understand that strategy. If I'm Houston, if I'm Pittsburgh, yes, I would also trust taking a Desmond Ridder. The problem is now the strategy, let's say for Detroit, was probably to take a position player at 2, Willis at 32, But now with the way quarterbacks are getting pushed up, you won't be able to wait to pick 32 to get a quarterback. So I feel like those two guys that I mentioned, Ritter and Willis, are to me 2 first-round type talents. But there's some good value and good depth here that'll vastly improve your quarterback too on your roster. And like we've seen the last 2 years, you better have a capable second quarterback. Otherwise, you're going to be dead in the water.
Why is Kenny Pickett being talked up as a potential, like the potential first quarterback off the board? Is that just media stuff, or do people have a different evaluation?
It could be both. People can have a different evaluation. The media can also be doing the agent's bidding and pumping them up. And, but I feel like he's another Power 5 quarterback that folks kind of they're scrambling to find Power 5 quarterbacks to talk about. And he had a really good year. Don't get me wrong, but I've seen a lot of Kenny Pickett over the course of 5 years. So I was shocked that this type of hype is coming from him. I've always viewed him as a solid QB2. So if you're taking him in the first round, shout out to him because he's going to get paid. But it'll do the expectations you're going to have for a guy that you take in the first round is going to be too much for him to really ever exceed. And I think you're setting him up for potential failure if you do. If someone took him around 2 or 3 and you viewed him as as an Andy Dalton type, that's fine. Andy Dalton had a solid career and kept his team afloat and kept them in the playoffs. But you had to have a really good team around Andy Dalton. And I think Andy Dalton was a better prospect than Kenny Pickett because Andy Dalton had the athleticism and won some big-time games. We hadn't really seen that from Kenny Pickett. Yeah, he had the one run, and he could move around a little bit, but he wasn't what Andy Dalton was as a runner at TCU and what he did with that TCU program, getting them to the Rose Bowl to go toe-to-toe with Wisconsin.
Think there's any chance that the Giants just give up on Daniel Jones and take a quarterback, or is this something they're pushing into next year?
That's something that I always just found fascinating, how everyone in the media was trying to make Philly take a quarterback when you have a young guy that got to the playoffs with a clearly bad defense in Jalen Hurts, but no one talks about Daniel Jones sitting right there in the division that has done nothing the last 3 to 4 years as a starter, and there's still hope for him, right? And so this guy is a walking turnover. If you're in the Giants and you look at Brian Daboll, who just came from Buffalo, you have experience with a Josh Allen type quarterback. Malik Willis fits that MO. He can run, has a rocket on, just needs a little bit of grooming. Why wouldn't you take him if he's there at 5 and have your, game breaker at quarterback? Because that's all the Giants need. You look at their roster, they're not bad. And this is a draft where they can add some more receiver pieces. They have a dynamic running back in Saquon Barkley who's going to be much better second year removed from that injury. Defense looks solid on paper, and they played really well last year. Quarterback play just hinders them, and I feel like now adding a Tyrod Taylor as your QB2 helps strengthen them at the backup position. Now you look at, can we get better as a starter? Malik Willis would definitely give them that. I've even said early in the year, because how the Giants are built, a quarterback, and I was thinking in terms of the second round, but now we probably can't get that far with someone like this quarterback in Desmond Ridder. I was like, Desmond Ridder would be the perfect fit for a Giants type team, a team that has a lot in place already and just needs someone to protect the football, keep the offense on pace, give them a little extra when the situation calls for it. And that's Ridder, in my opinion.
So looking at the rest of the top 10, like the Giants have the 2 picks. They're at 5 and 7. The Jets are at 4 and 10. How do you pair up picks like that? Like, do you think you have to play one off another of these teams? Potentially, I mean, the Jets don't need to trade up for a quarterback, so it's very unlikely that they're going to package picks together to get to that number 2 pick. Because that's what I was thinking with Detroit. If they don't want to take the quarterback at number 2, could they feasibly trade that pick down? Like, who is the player that someone would trade up to number 2 for? Does that player exist in this draft? Or would it be 2 teams really want to get Willis? They think he's going to go 6 to Carolina, so they have to trade up to 2 in order to get him. Like, is that scenario on the table?
It's definitely plausible because you have, people could fall in love with these tackles. Someone could fall in love with one of these edge rushers, Walker, Hutchinson, or even Thibodeau if he's not taking number 1. So I get that approach. However, it would be hard for me, out of all the scouting that you've done all season, to have a top 10 pick and have two of them, no less. Two opportunities to take two of the top 10 players in the entire draft. I'm not moving any one of those top 10 picks, or especially if I have, two of them. There's no way I would move two top 10 picks to get one player where I can get two top 10 players.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot, especially when you're teams like this that are still in the rebuilding phase, get as many guys under contract as possible, top tier talent, and then hope to hit later on down the board. It seems to be the best way to actually build one of these teams instead of constantly paying for free agents who are no good whatsoever. Wide receivers in this draft. How deep is it? Because I'm seeing as high as 7 going in the first round. That seems to be the new thing over the past 3-4 years, especially now where we've seen in the offseason all these wide receivers just making absolute bank. That eventually there's going to become a problem in terms of salary cap, that where it was once to the point where if you had one of these quarterbacks under rookie contract, you would save so much money. But if you could pile up 1 or 2 wide receivers on a rookie contract, it seems like that's going to be a lot of savings under the salary cap moving forward.
I feel like I don't even worry about the salary cap because, teams will make do with how they see fit. They'll find a way to keep guys they want to keep. So I don't worry about the salary cap. But to answer your original question, the receiver class is always deep, and is going to be that way until college football changes. So that's why we see the amount of talented receivers, the amount of talented corners and safeties, because teams in college football are throwing the football 65%, 75% of the time, but also you're seeing more 4-5 wide receiver sets. So these guys are developing at a higher rate. They're getting a lot of reps out there on the field. And with that being the backdrop, you're going to see, so many talented players showcase their skill set and makes them attractive for the NFL level.
So just continuing to look down at it, are there any, obviously with so many wide receivers, where are the grades that you put on the guys that you would expect to go pretty highly in this draft? Is it shaking out how you think, or are there guys that are potential values right now?
There's some values I see. I feel like no one's talking about Mekhi Polk, the wide receiver out of Mississippi State, who led the SEC in catches and consistently found himself open, which is how you lead the SEC in catches. And people are bypassing him. And he is someone that has played big time competition and going against, tremendous defenders in the SEC. I feel like he'll be a great value pick somewhere around 3. No one's talking about him. And this is just a wealth of small college talent, like your Christian Watsons, your Isaiah Westons out of Northern Iowa, your Lance McCutcheons out of Montana State, your Sam Houston wide receiver, Jaquez Ezzard. There's so much value with these underrated, small school guys. Deshaun Dixon out of Nichols, top tier talent, guys is going to end up making impacts as rookies. So if you don't get one in round 1, day 2, going into day 3, this is where you want to have a bunch of picks. And teams that have a bunch of picks, more than 7, are going to do a lot of damage in this draft because, like I said earlier, this is essentially 2 draft classes.
What are we looking like for the corner position or just the secondary in general? It does seem like there is a lean after this run on offensive linemen and defensive linemen. It very quickly shifts into wide receivers and corners. Where do you see the top corners coming from, and who is actually the best of these guys?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Kaiir Elam out of Florida. I have him as my highest graded corner, but I mean, you could sell me on any one of these guys, like Roger McQuarrie out of Auburn. Every time I turned on one of these top wide receivers that everybody's put in the first round, they played Auburn, and they had their worst game against Roger McQuarrie. I don't care how short his arms are. He's making guys miserable out there on the perimeter. You have Sam Houston, Zion McCollum, Joshua Williams out of Fayetteville State. You also have, Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner. All these guys are legit studs at corner, and they're long, they're athletic, they have ball skills. It's the holy trinity of the cornerback position and what you want. And so this is a really strong corner group. Marcus Jones would be an outstanding slot corner. He's 5'8", 174, but also instantly helps you as a returner. This is just a tremendous class. And again, to the same point I made earlier, when you have the amount of talent you're going to have at wide receiver, it also forces you to recruit, develop, and foster talent at corner and safety. And so you're going to see the same amount of top tier guys at corner that you would at receiver.
When we think about the combine, when you just kind of mentioned like, oh yeah, he has small arms, that's going to really draw it back. We always hear the small hand stuff with the quarterback. Do you read too much into that? And even some of the stuff from the combine, like, oh, this guy ran a 4.2 or something insane like that. Does that stuff really matter when you're doing scouting, or are you watching the tape being like, hey, this guy plays faster on the field than he runs in a straight line? Although he has short arms, he makes the right plays, puts himself in the right position, that it doesn't matter that his arms are a little bit shorter than someone else because he has better talent and he has just better skills and smarts to get into those right spots to make plays. Like, how does your evaluation go into it? Do you think the combine's overrated?
I think it's overrated for what we tend to put a lot of emphasis on, the 40 time, how high somebody jumped or how long someone's arms are. It's important for the medical and interviews to really get to know these players and really, see who has, you looked under the hood to see who has issues that could potentially be a problem moving forward. That's the most important part of the combine, but it's about the tape, man. Straight up. You have to, if you are a 6'3" offensive tackle and they're saying, man, he's too short, but every time you watch him, he's dominating to where you didn't even know he was 6'3". It's the things that, you expect that shouldn't surprise you. And it should surprise you that you didn't expect it. So case in point, we talk about Kyle Hamilton's range all season long, and then we find out he runs a 4.6, and now people are like, well, he's too slow. Well, if he ran a 4.2, you would have been like, well, yeah, you see that on tape. He clearly has range. He runs 4.2. That's evident. But now since he runs a 4.6, you're questioning whether or not he has range, even though you talked about the range he had all season. So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that a lot of these guys do when they talk about the combine, and then all of a sudden somebody runs a 4.2. You're like, well, let me go back to the tape. Well, the tape should have been prevalent from jump. And that's what you always should stand on. And how you play is more important. You talk about short arms. You know who else has short arms at offensive tackle? Joe Thomas, Hall of Famer. So miss me with all that.
Like Kyle Hamilton right now, when we were talking about it like pre-combine coming out of the season, and he finishes off with Notre Dame, it's like, oh, I mean, he could be a safety who goes inside the top 5, inside the top 10. It seems like he's slipping down. Is that because of what we have seen from him from like a slow 40 time, or is that because there are certain positions that just seem to be devalued in the draft now, be it safety, linebacker, running back? Is he just a casualty of that?
I think it's because of the combine. And also, to your point about position devaluing, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. If you constantly say, we're not going to draft a running back in the first round, not going to draft a running back in the first round, and you take a running back in the second round, he balls out, you're like, well, see, you don't have to take a running back in the first round. Well, you just said you wasn't going to take one. So, yeah, you didn't take one. So it's kind of like self-fulfilling that prophecy. But if you take one in the first, and all these redrafts, you always see, man, 3 or 4 running backs going in the first round. Like, yes, you're supposed to take those guys that are game breakers in the first round, especially at that position where your age, kind of helps play a role into your success. Why wouldn't you want to get a 5th-year contract on a young guy when after the first contract is where his value starts to decrease a little bit? Why wouldn't you want to take that guy in the first round? It just makes so much sense, right? But a lot of people just say stuff that they heard, which tends to be dumb, and they just continue to follow that same train of thought. So if you are telling me, I watch this guy make play after play on a deep ball, it's a passing league, I need a guy that can erase mistakes on the back end that takes away the deep ball. Nah, I'm going to just wait till the second round because I can't take this clearly defined game breaker in the first round because of position value. That's just completely dumb. Can you score? Can you take the ball away? Give me those guys first before you take any one of these offensive linemen. If anything, the Bengals showed you the blueprint. You take guys that can affect the game in that way. Yes, offensive line is critical, but I need touchdowns and I need interceptions. I need sacks. Give me all those guys first before we worry about how we can protect them and do things like that.
I like the point about the running backs and getting that 5th-year option, only because when was like the last time that we saw a running back signed to a second contract? Maybe Derrick Henry, although he's just coming off another injury now and missed half the season, was able to rally back, but he wasn't clearly the same Derrick Henry in the playoffs as he was before he got hurt midway through the season. But like, is it ever worthwhile for an NFL team to give a running back a second contract? Like, why not use the first round pick, get the 5 years, pay the low salary, and just say, hey, you know what? We'll draft another one in 5 years.
That makes the most sense, both business-wise and from a practical standpoint. And not every running back is the same. There are certain running backs that you could give that second contract to, the ones that are super elusive, that have found a way to stay healthy, that still has that game-breaking element, within this game. And for me, if I'm looking, let's say from a historical standpoint, someone like Barry Sanders would have gotten the second contract, because of how his style of play was. He rarely took direct shots, was out there for a full 16-game season, very elusive. You couldn't really touch him to get a hit on him. So that's someone that stayed healthy, And so even someone like Derrick Henry, we just really recently saw him get injured. But when you have guys that are able to get healthy, stay healthy, and still be that game-breaking element, i.e. an Adrian Peterson, those guys, you give those guys those second contracts. But not everyone is built the same. You don't give certain receivers or quarterbacks second contracts that haven't proven to stay healthy or haven't proven to be productive. It's the same thing across the board, no matter what position you play.
It just seems like there's so much attrition at running back. Even someone like Christian McCaffrey, who gets the second contract, and all of a sudden he's no longer what we consider to be a top 3 running back in all of football because he can't stay on the field, and you worry about if these hamstring injuries, quad injuries, catch up to him and whether he remains as elusive or not. He feels more like a luxury piece. We're seeing it with Zeke right now too, where Tony Pollard looks better than Zeke, that if you just never sign, you might miss out on extreme talent. Maybe you know that when it comes around. But unless you know that you have Barry Sanders or LaDainian Tomlinson or even a Derrick Henry at this point, and I would have thought that Christian McCaffrey would have fallen into that same bucket as well, but apparently that's probably not going to be the case, that you would just be blindly better to let everyone walk and find someone new. It seems like you would make fewer mistakes that way.
I wish people had the same type of mentality toward the quarterback position. Stop paying these average to below average quarterbacks because you think this guy could be good. At least these backs can be good, or are good. Someone like Saquon Barkley also falls in that boat too. I think he's someone that you definitely take in the top 10, top 5 where he went because his talent suggested that. It's not his fault he's playing with the worst quarterback in not history, not only be hyperbolic, but he's playing with the worst quarterback in the division. And when teams know you're the option and they don't have to fear the passing game, it's hard for you to run. Zeke played with an injury last year. And I think that's something that he has to really, he's been dealing with those injuries. But when his rookie year, the second year, you saw how explosive this guy was. So it's clearly something was hampering him. And you could tell when you have a difference maker at running back, it's clearly obvious because of the nature of that position. But I feel like the league needs to focus on resetting the market on quarterback play instead of worrying about everybody else's money at every other position, because that's what sets teams back. Not because you paid a running back and he's only able to give you 11 games out of 17. How about this quarterback that's out there all 17 games and stinks all 17 games that you gave this monstrous contract to? Like, what possessed you to pay our Carson Wentz that money, seeing that he wasn't an impact type talent? You get what you pay for, you get what you ask for, get it because you asked for it.
That's the part that I don't understand at all, is that we know that you need to have an impact quarterback in order to win a Super Bowl. I'm trying to think of the last one that wasn't the case, that even got there. It was probably Jimmy G, but he was competent, and the rest of that team was just amazing. So you had one of the best defenses in football, one of the best offensive lines in football, and you had a fantastic scheme, and they still weren't able to hold off the Chiefs, who had that guy at quarterback, who would just be the talent to rise above everyone else. Like, you mentioned Sam Darnold earlier. I don't understand why he continues, as a backup. Sure, why not? Give him a small contract. If he has to come in a game, maybe he can take a snap or two. I just don't understand the willingness to continue to invest in these guys over and over. Are they placeholders? You mentioned the Wentz contract. That absolutely makes no sense. What are teams planning on doing with Carson Wentz? What is the goal if you sign Carson Wentz? Is it to not be horrible anymore? Or is it maybe we can lose in the first round?
Imagine you got Carson Wentz. You gave up draft capital in the deepest draft in draft history to Carson Wentz, coming off that season where the team needed to win and get in against the worst team in the NFL, in a situation where it was supposed to be the best situation because the coach knew him, they prayed together, all that good stuff like that they talked about that had nothing to do with football, and you still trade for that guy? What's going to happen, they're going to be surprised when they're not ahead of the Eagles and Cowboys in the division and wonder why. It's going to be fascinating to watch Washington this season not be good based off the move they made right there at quarterback. I just find that fascinating. And the fact that the Giants are in the same boat, Houston's going to be in the same boat as well. If they decide to roll with Davis Mills again, you just see this happen over and over again. And it's never about X's and O's, it's about Jimmy's and Joe's. You can just look at some team's roster and be like, all right, yeah, that's a team that's going to win no more than 7 games. Easily. It's not complicated. Football is an easy game. Who has the best players? Who has the most talent? And to your point about Jimmy G, quiet as kept, Matt Stafford's the same guy. I mean, if homeboy from San Francisco catches that interception, they hit him right in the stomach, we don't even get the Rams in the Super Bowl, you know? And did Matt Stafford actually play a significant role in that Super Bowl game, or did the Bengals defense just collapse in the end? I think, Stafford did just enough to win. Shout out to him. It took him, 15 years for some people kept believing in Stafford, even though he wasn't showing you over the course of 15 years. And if the safety from San Francisco, Tart, catches that interception, what are we talking about now?
I get it with the Texans if they do want to roll back Davis Mills. If they've done
what
the
did
event,
he do last year though?
Nothing. But they're going to be bad either way. Like, I would think that if I'm trying to plan out a roster, if I can get if you don't have one of these quarterbacks evaluated very highly, and you don't think that they are a legitimate game changer to your franchise, why not roll with the guy who is, bad, but you pay him absolutely nothing. Try to build the rest of your team, get an offensive line in place, get these skill guys in place, and then hopefully next year, after being bad again, you have another high draft pick, and if you've evaluated next year's class a little bit better, that you can go get one of these guys, because you're not wasting a year on that contract. At least logically, that makes some sense to me. The Washington thing makes no sense, because they actually think they're contenders. Houston at least realizes they're no good.
You know who had the best offensive line last year? Colts. Did not make the playoffs. Can you score? Can you take the ball away? And can your quarterback impact the game? There's a bunch of teams like going into the season, we just kind of cancel and just say, yeah, these are not playoff teams. You're going to get the one anomaly that surprises you. But for the most part, you can just look at the quarterback and tie that directly to what they're not going to do this season. So it's going to be fascinating to watch, man. It's going to be very interesting to see how this thing plays out. And, if you're Houston and you feel as though, because the scouts have already evaluated, are starting to evaluate the 2023 class, right? Some guys have already started to evaluate the next group. And we talk about next year's class. Remember, coming into this year, everyone said, oh, it's going to be Spencer Rattler, it's going to be DJ Uiagalelei, and both of those guys didn't play nowhere near to what people expected them to play. So now everybody's punting on next season when those same guys are still in that class too. And do we really think Bryce Young is that big of a difference? Is CJ Stroud, who everybody hated earlier in the year, now they say he's a can't miss guy? Like, which one is it? So the point is, you really don't know until you get to the next year and evaluate those guys. So it's almost like the same mystery box being pushed down the road once again.
At least it feels like that's something you can sell to your fan base. Like, oh, just wait. We're going to build up this roster. And that's an excuse to still sell tickets to a team like, oh, come watch these guys. Davis Mills, he's not going to be here in 2 years. Don't worry about him. But we're going to get enough assets in place that, when we go get the quarterback, not only is he going to be good, we're going to have this roster. It's probably fool's gold. But at least I think that's what they're trying to sell.
Yeah, you got to sell something, man, because right now – it was empty in those stands when Houston, this is the same organization that tried to sell their fan base. DeAndre Hopkins being gone was a net positive, and it ran out Deshaun Watson. So, hey, man, it's what if they like it, I love it, right?
When you were going to games and broadcasting this season, were there any players that might not be obviously first round or day one, even day two players in this draft, but players that just seeing them live really stuck out to you that you remember throughout the course of the season, rather than just seeing these scouting reports? Obviously, you're doing your scouting reports, and you have the live interaction with a lot of these players, whereas a lot of people just don't. They're watching film, they're watching tape. Are there some guys that transcend what you might see on a 5-minute clip that people are evaluating?
That's a great question. One guy because I did a lot of Monmouth games, and their receiver, Lonnie Moore, the fourth, is just someone that just consistently stood out. He makes play after play and just dominates. when they need a big play in the passing game, he was the one to make it, whether it's in the slot or out on a perimeter. And he's someone that's about 5'10", 175 pounds. He didn't run 4.2, but he ran, I think, about 4.6. But it's weird to watch him play. You think he's faster than what he timed. He plays bigger than his size. He understands timing. I just think that he's going to get on a roster and do great things. And traveling to these All-Star games and seeing these guys live, that's how a couple of receivers came out and stood out. The Isaiah Westons that I mentioned, or the Lance McCutcheons, the Jaquez Ezzard. I saw him when he played at Howard. Then I saw him, this past January at the NFLPA game in the Senior Bowl, as a Sam Houston Bearcat. So watching him move from different schools and still be as dominant, that's why I said these small college guys are going to be phenomenal. And a lot of these guys are going to make rosters, especially a lot of these HBCU players. You didn't have any HBCU player drafted last year. I think we may see 7 to 10 drafted, with another 20 to 30 ending up on NFL rosters as undrafted free agents.
Do you see more of a shift? Like everyone just talks about, oh, we need a Power 5 quarterback. You need a Power 5 guy from this position. Is that where the real advantage is right now in the NFL draft, is the scouting at these small schools? Like, how do you rectify watching the small schools and figuring out how that talent translates against bigger players, potentially faster players, against better teams at the next level? Or does talent just stick out? It doesn't really matter.
Is both. The talent does stick out. And I think a lot of what you're seeing with the small school guys is the development of the talent. These guys don't tend to come out early. So they're getting 4 to 5 years of development in the same coaching voice, because a lot of these coaches at the small school levels don't just job hop like a lot of the guys at the Power 5 level. So you're getting the same voice, the same consistency throughout your time, the same development, and you grow into your body, you grow into your role, and you dominate. And also for, the quarterback position, to be completely fair and honest, there's a lot of bounce back guys in the FCS and D2 levels too. So, for instance, a guy like Cole Kelly, who I like, quarterback 6'7", 260, kind of like Josh Allen, coming out of southeastern Louisiana. He can throw the heck out the football, has a rocket arm. He has 29 rushing touchdowns. So he can do a lot. He was the MVP of the NFLPA game. Well, he's an Arkansas Razorback bounce back, so he had that Power 5 pedigree, went down to the FCS and was able to continue to dominate. So you see a lot of bounce back guys. So it's not true homegrown talent, but you do see a lot of homegrown talent because of what I mentioned with the coaching staff, the consistency, the guys growing into the bodies. You see this a lot at the tight end position. Guys can be tall, slow receivers. They go to an FCS program to develop it to athletic, fast tight ends. So that's what you have there. And I just feel like that's why we see such an abundance. Plus, this started way back in the early 80s, the 85 scholarship rule that came into place. Now teams like your Pitt and Penn State can't just house 200, scholarship athletes. You have a limit. So now that pushes talent down to the group of 5 level, pushes talent down to the FCS, and so on and so forth. So you're seeing a wide array of talent being dispersed, in conjunction with the fact that now everyone is on TV or some sort of streaming device. So you don't have that recruiting carrot to say, hey, we play on TV. Well, yeah, so does, Kent State. So I'm going to go to Kent State and start, as opposed to sitting on the bench at Ohio State. And so you see all of that factors in. So that's why we see the talent all across the country, more than what we've seen before.
I hadn't considered that, the advent of streaming and the accessibility of all these games being broadcast everywhere. That has to have played a huge advantage with some of these guys. Do you think that is now affecting bigger type players? Like you said, I don't want to go to the bench at Ohio State and sit there for 3 years, maybe never get a chance to play. I always think back to someone like Matt Castle, who just sat behind 2 quarterbacks who got drafted in the first round at USC. Like, is there any chance that would ever happen now? Would he just go to a smaller school and be like, yeah, you can still watch me wherever. Watch me on ESPNU.
Yeah, he can go anywhere. I think someone asked me, man, this was before Florida State won the national championship with Jameis Winston. They were, down the year before. It's like, man, what happened to Florida State? I was like, I'll tell you what happened to Florida State, Miami, Florida Atlantic, Florida International, South Florida, Central Florida, all these schools that didn't exist or have football teams in the late 80s, early 90s popped up with programs. So now the talent isn't concentrated at those 3 schools, Florida State, Miami. Why would you sit the bench at Miami and I can go start at Florida International, which is also located in Miami? I can go nearby to Boca Raton and start at Florida Atlantic. I don't have to go to Gainesville. I can go right there to Central Florida and start. I can go to South Florida right there in Tampa and start. And those things start to happen to where guys that would have normally gone to these powerhouse programs go to these mid-major programs and dominate. And that's the biggest key.
How much do you think that the ability to earn money as a college football player now can play into going to these smaller schools? Because I would think that would be some sort of leverage, that if you went to a smaller school and you are the big man on campus, you're an elite quarterback, you're an elite wide receiver, someone that makes plays, and that gets picked up, that gets passed around the internet, that your earning potential with off the field stuff now, whether it be through social media, endorsements, whatever, could be a lot higher than if you're the sixth best player on Alabama or something like that.
Right. And I agree with you. That's why I'm always looking at some of these decisions that these student athletes make. Like, hey, man, sometimes it's beneficial for you long term. Don't sacrifice short term money, long term riches for short term money. You can go to, let's say if you got 3 guys coming out of New Orleans and they're elite prospects, 5-star prospects. Why wouldn't you go to Tulane? You're right there in New Orleans. You can make Tulane be the place to be, and you can build your brand that way. The money potential is significantly higher there as opposed to getting whatever money you're going to get right up front to go play down the road at LSU. Now, granted, LSU has deeper pockets, and they can do that. And you have a lot of boosters that didn't even go to school. They're just fans of LSU that they can pay for these players. But sometimes players and, their surrounding group, their family, their inner circle has to think big picture. And that would totally be the seismic shift that could happen. That's what you're sort of seeing with Jackson State and Coach Deion Sanders. You can come play for me. You're going to get the same level of exposure. I'm the greatest cornerback ever. Why wouldn't I get, the top corners to come play for me, And so if more players thought like those guys, the Travis Hunters and things of that nature, you go there, now you're a legend. I think people need to start worrying about legacy too. Like, hey man, like I can go somewhere and be a legend as opposed to being just a solid player. And, just to say I played at Oklahoma, or I could be a legend at Tulsa, and I think people, if they thought like that, the money will follow.
Safety and linebacker keep getting pushed down the board. Obviously, we talked about Kyle Hamilton at safety, but in terms of the rest of the safeties on the board, or even some impact linebackers, none really seem to be projected, at least, to really go inside the top 20, top 25. Are there guys down the board this year that you can see making legit impacts year one, but are just pushed to the second, potentially third round, just because of the position that they play?
Yeah, I think 2 guys that could even flirt with first-round picks are Troy Anderson out of Montana State and Chad Muma out of Wyoming. Both guys are sort of similar. They're athletic. They can run. They got range. They're versatile. They can play all 3 linebacker spots. We saw both down at the Senior Bowl just do exceptionally well. DeMarco Jackson, another speed, hit, seek, and destroy type linebacker, is another one that can really go. We talked about Jackson State, James Houston, who was an off-ball linebacker at Florida, goes to Jackson State. They turned him into an edge rusher. Then he goes to the All-Star game, and they put him back at off-ball linebacker. He's still making plays. So you got a lot of impact players. Then you got the Georgia trio of Nakobe Dean, Channing Tindall, and also Quay Walker. I think this is one of the better linebacker classes we've seen in quite some time, to be honest.
Let's end it with this, because running backs about as well as anyone I've ever talked to. So in terms of your top 3 graded running backs, who are they going to be? Where do you think that they end up going in the draft? And who are the players that we legitimately should be watching out for day 3 free agent signings? Because you always find 1 or 2 of these guys, then all of a sudden I'm watching. Next year it's like, oh yeah, that's a guy that Emory really liked. All of a sudden he's starting for the 49ers or something crazy like that.
Yeah, my number 1 running back is Jashawn Corbin out of Florida State. I think he's probably going to go somewhere in round 2 or 3. But he's someone that has a Kareem Hunt type vision, footwork, and elusiveness, and he is a legit stud at the position. But guys, I think that will go ahead of him that are my 2 and 3, Isaiah Spiller and Breece Hall, respectively. Those are foundational backs, guys that you could start if you're a team like Buffalo that needs a foundational back. Breece Hall, I think, would be the perfect fit. Someone like that could go to Miami and help pair up with Chase Edmonds, who I was a big fan of coming out of Fordham. So I think those two guys are really good starters at the NFL level. One guy to keep an eye on that no one's really talking about Jalen Warren of Oklahoma State. He's a short, compact guy. He's about 5'7", 215, but he's so tough to bring down. He's always falling forward, has good body lean, good vision, good footwork. He breaks a lot of tackles. He could be someone that can go on day 3 that ends up carving out a starting role for some of these football teams. So he's someone that I liked watching his film and definitely want to keep an eye on.
All right, Emory Hunt at FBall Game Plan on Twitter. Let everyone know where they can find your package. I can put a link down in the description as well that goes directly to the scouting reports. But how much time does this take you to put together? Because it is very comprehensive.
Yeah, it's over 1,000 individual scouting prospects, the largest draft guide in draft guide history. No one else can top what I just did this year. And it took about a month and 2 months because normally my grades are done before the combine. But because there was a new All-Star game this year, the HBCU Legacy Bowl, dab smack in the middle of February. That took a week away from me because now you got to go to that All-Star game and evaluate those prospects. And I also was on CBS Sports HQ covering the combine all week long from Sunday to Sunday. So that took another week. So that's 2 weeks going. So when I was at the combine, I was at 400 prospect scouting reports, and it was all skill players. I hadn't evaluated the offensive line. So from March 7th to March 28th, when I was done, I got over 600 scouting reports done. It's a process. You start at 5. I get up at 5. I start at 5:30, take a break at about noon to about 2:30, go eat, go work out, come back at it about 3 and go to about 7:30. Do that every day, 7 days a week, and you knock it out. And that's just, and you got to stay off social media. I'm always fascinated about guys that, that tweet out while they're scouting prospects. How can you watch film and constantly tweet? You're tweeting all day. When are you watching film? But you can get that in-depth draft guide at footballgameplan.com/2022 draft guide.
All right. And I'll throw that link down in the description if anyone wants to go get that. I highly recommend that you do. Emory, thanks for doing this. I'll see you same time next year.
Always a pleasure, man. Always. Anytime.
All right. Remember to smash the like button for the episode. Give me your top 3 players who you project to go in the NFL draft down in the comment section. Sub to Mayo Media Network. Rate and review the podcast. And that will do it for me. I'll be back Thursday with Jeff Ratcliffe from FTN Network to talk about the fantasy implications and destinations of potential rookie skill position players and some of the latest NFL free agent signings. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Pat Mayo. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience.
Because he's the running back expert.
Yeah.
My mom just won't shut up about Kyron Williams because she's a Notre Dame fan.
Yeah.
What's his take on Kyron Williams?
He's my number 4 back.
Okay.
He's
He's
number
the 40 time because his 40 time is like horrible.
That's another thing. People raved about him all season. You saw him break numerous runs, rarely get caught from behind, and then all of a sudden he runs a 4.6, 4.7. Everybody's like, oh, I don't know. And it's funny because every year in the draft, everybody talks about, well, can he pass protect? Can he pass? Well, here's the best pass protector at the position in the draft, and they devalue pass pro as a running back because this dude in particular runs a 4.6, 4.7. So I can't keep up with the changing narrative. That dude can ball, and he is someone that he's my number 4, and I gave an 80 grade to.
There you go, Paul.
My mom is going to be very happy.
Well, she's not going to be happy when he doesn't go to the Bills.
She wants him to go to the Bills, but
Experience.